What if I told you that the most famous novel about human resilience is based on a lie that we have taken at face value for centuries? The story of Robinson Crusoe seems to us to be a romantic myth about the victory of civilization over wild nature, but the reality was much more frightening, dirty, and hopeless. The real hero of this drama did not have a loyal servant named Friday, did not rescue princesses, and did not build cozy farms with neat fences. Alexander Selkirk, a Scottish rebel and privateer, found himself in an icy hell where his only companion was his own madness. He voluntarily stepped into the abyss of loneliness, escaping the catastrophe that seemed inevitable to him aboard the cursed ship. His story is a chronicle of the disintegration of personality and painful rebirth, which Daniel Defoe chose to keep quiet about in favor of a beautiful fairy tale. 4 years and 4 months of absolute silence turned the hot-tempered sailor into a creature that could hardly be called human. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how one forgotten detail in the navigation charts turned salvation into a deadly trap. Are you ready to learn the truth about what really made an experienced sailor choose death on a deserted island over serving on a ship? In 1704, the ship Sunk Ports, under the command of Captain Thomas Stradling, stopped at the Juan Fernandez archipelago to replenish its water supplies. This was no pleasure cruise, but a brutal privateering raid, full of deprivation, disease, and constant conflict between the crew and the command. Alexander Selkirk, being a boatswain, had not only a nasty temper, but also a professional instinct that screamed at him about impending disaster. He saw that the hull of the ship was eaten away by worms, and the plating was rotting and crumbling at the slightest impact of a wave. The conflict between Selkirk and the captain reached its peak in this quiet bay, when the boatswain openly declared the ship unseaworthy. Stradling, an ambitious and cruel man, took this as an attempt at mutiny and a challenge to his authority in front of the weary crew. The quarrel escalated into a fierce argument, during which Selkirk, in a fit of rage, demanded to be put ashore. He was confident that the other sailors would support him and also refused to sail on the leaky tub. But he miscalculated in his assessment of human psychology and herd mentality. None of the crew sided with him, preferring the familiar danger on board to the unknown on the wild shore. Captain Stradling, with vengeful pleasure, granted the rebellious boatswain's request, ordering the boat to be prepared for launch. Selkirk may have hoped that the captain would change his mind, or perhaps he simply wanted to scare him, but the wheels of fate had already been set in motion. His belongings, a chest, a musket, navigational instruments, and a Bible, were roughly thrown onto the rocky beach. At the last moment, as the boat pushed off from the shore, Selkirk's self-confidence evaporated instantly, giving way to animal terror. He threw himself into the water, begging to be taken back, shouting that he was ready to obey any orders. Stradling only laughed in response, enjoying the humiliation of his enemy and leaving him as an example to the others. The ship set sail and disappeared over the horizon, taking with it the last hope of returning to civilization. The irony of fate was that Selkirk's grim prophecy came true with frightening accuracy just a few months later. The Cinque Ports did indeed sink off the coast of Colombia, taking the lives of most of the crew who had not dared to support the boatswain. The few who survived the shipwreck were taken prisoner by the Spanish, where a fate worse than death awaited them in the damp dungeons of Lima. Selkirk survived, but the price he had to pay for being right was monstrous. He was left alone on Tierra Island, which in his imagination was quite different from reality. It was not a tropical paradise with coconuts, but a harsh piece of rock buffeted by icy winds. There were no natives, no pirates, not even the hope of a passing ship. Only the deafening sound of the surf and the realization that he had signed his own death warrant. We would be very interested to hear your opinion. What would you have done in Selkirk's place? Would you have risked sailing on a rotten ship or chosen the unknown of the island? Write about it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. What if I told you that the island that became a prison for our hero was the perfect machine for killing an unprepared person? Tierra is a volcanic peak jutting out of the ocean with an extremely complex and dangerous terrain. The coastline was a narrow strip of rocks, beyond which began sheer cliffs and dense, impenetrable thickets. The climate here was far from Caribbean idle. Frequent rains, piercing winds, and cold nights. Selkirk spent his first weeks on the shore, staring at the horizon until his eyes hurt, hoping to see a sail. He was afraid to venture deep into the jungle, fearing unknown predators and strange sounds coming from the thicket. His diet consisted of shellfish, which he gathered in shallow water, and sea lion meat. But now it was mating season, and huge aggressive animals had taken over the beach, making it deadly dangerous to stay there. Sea lions weighing hundreds of kilograms roared day and night, fighting fierce battles for territory. Selkirk was forced to retreat deeper into the island, overcoming his fear of the unknown forest. This forced relocation was the first step towards his adaptation, although he perceived it as exile. He found a small cave that became his first shelter from the rain and wind. The island was infested with rats that had come here from previous ships and multiplied in incredible numbers. At night, they attacked the sleeping sailor, biting his fingers and nose, preventing him from sleeping. It was a real torture of sleep deprivation, which quickly undermined his sanity and willpower. Selkirk woke up in a cold sweat, fighting off invisible enemies, and felt madness rising in his throat. The island's vegetation was unique. Huge ferns and cabbage trees grew here. The terrain was cut by deep gorges and ravines hidden under thick foliage. One wrong step could lead to a fall from a height and a broken bone, which in conditions of solitude meant a slow and painful death. Fresh water was available, but it had to be reached through thorny bushes. Selkirk learned to read the island, memorizing trails and dangerous places. He began to understand that the shore was a place of death, and life was only possible on the peaks and in the valleys. It was a cruel lesson, with nature itself as the examiner, unforgiving of mistakes. He was just a speck of dust on this piece of land lost in the endless ocean. Are you ready to find out what sound nearly drove him mad in the first few months? Guess what happened next when all hope of a quick rescue was finally extinguished? Alexander's worst enemy was not hunger or cold, but total corrosive loneliness. For the first 8 months, he was in a state of deep depression, bordering on catatonia. He would sit motionless on the shore for hours, staring at the water until the tears dried on his weather-beaten face. Thoughts of suicide became his constant companions, whispering simple solutions to all his problems. A musket with gunpowder lay nearby, and the temptation to pull the trigger was incredibly strong. Only his deep religiousness, instilled in him by his strict Scottish upbringing, kept him from doing so. The fear of eternal damnation proved stronger than the desire to end his earthly suffering. To keep himself from going mad with silence, he began talking to himself, to the trees, and to the wind. He read the Bible aloud, trying to pronounce the words loudly and clearly so as not to forget the sound of human speech. His prayers turned into frantic cries with which he tried to drown out the sound of the surf and the roar of the sea lions.
But I am human.
During this period, he practically stopped caring about his daily life, living like an animal. Food was just fuel, sleep was a temporary oblivion, and each new day was a curse. He lost track of time, orienting himself only by the change of day and night. But one day a change occurred in his mind, which often happens to people in extreme situations. He realized that self-pity would not bring salvation, but only hasten the end. If it was God's will that he die here, he would die standing, but he would not give up without a fight. Selkirk began to systematize his life, coming up with activities and tasks for himself. He forced himself to move, build, search, and explore every inch of accessible land. Work became his therapy, his way of preserving what remained of his human dignity. He began to improve his dwelling, making it more comfortable and secure. These were simple actions, but they gave him a sense of control over the situation. Every stake driven, every knot tied was a small victory over chaos. During this period, he laid the foundation for his future survival, based on discipline and faith. He did not yet know that he would spend years here, but he was already prepared to fight for each day. Silence ceased to be an enemy and became the backdrop for a new life. Loneliness cleared his mind of the unnecessary, leaving only the most important things. He began to see beauty where he had previously seen only danger. Like this, if you are also amazed by the power of the human spirit in a hopeless situation. Want to know a secret that will change your perception of fire making? When his gunpowder supplies ran out, Selkirk realized that his musket could no longer serve as a source of sparks. Losing fire would mean a return to raw food, cold nights, and complete vulnerability to the darkness. He had to recall ancient methods that he had only heard about but never used. He found a pimento tree on the island, whose wood was dry and hard enough. By rubbing two pieces of wood together for a long time, he was able to produce the coveted ember. It took incredible patience and physical effort, rubbing his palms raw. But when the first smoke rose from the dry moss, it was a victory comparable to the discovery of a new continent. Since then, he has kept the fire burning constantly, never allowing it to go out completely. The hearth became the heart of his camp, the center of his small universe. He learned to use different types of wood for different purposes, one for bright light, another for long smoldering and warmth. But fire was needed not only for warmth, but also for cooking and processing materials. Selkirk used old barrel hoops found on the shore to make knives for himself. He heated the metal on coals and forged it with stones, giving it the desired shape and sharpness. It was a primitive forge, where a cobblestone served as a hammer and a rocky ledge served as an anvil. Sharpening was done on rough stones, requiring hours of monotonous work. But these homemade blades were an extension of his hands, allowing him to cut up prey and work with wood. He learned how to prepare the meat of goats, which were abundant on the island, so that it would keep for a long time. Boiling and smoking became his main cooking methods. Broth strengthened his strength, and smoked meat could be stored in reserve in case of illness or bad weather. Along with his craftsmanship, his physical health returned. Fresh air, no alcohol or tobacco, and constant physical activity made his body strong and resilient. He forgot about scurvy and other seasicknesses. He learned to use everything the island had to offer without throwing anything away. Tendons were used for thread, bones for needles and awls. Saving resources became second nature to him. Every item in his household had its own history of creation and its own price in labor hours. He created his own Stone Age using the knowledge of the Age of Enlightenment. It was a unique synthesis that allowed him to survive. But how did he solve the problem of clothing when his European dress turned into rags? In the next chapter, you will learn how a sailor became a tailor. Selkirk understood that in order to survive, he needed a reliable home, not just a temporary shelter in a cave. He chose a spot on high ground with a good view of the ocean, but which was sheltered from the wind. Here he built 2 huts out of pimento wood, covering them with long grass and leaves. One hut was for sleeping and resting. It was smaller and warmer. He used the second one as a kitchen and workshop, where he cut up his catch and prepared food. Separating the areas was an important sanitary decision that saved him from flies and the smell of decay. He reinforced the walls of the huts with stones and interwove them with branches, creating a sturdy structure. He covered the floor with skins to protect himself from the dampness coming from the ground. These were not palaces, but for a man accustomed to cramped cabins, they seemed the height of comfort. Inside the living hut, he made shelves to store his few treasures: a Bible, navigation tools, and a knife. He had no furniture, but he built a kind of bed raised above the floor. This protected him from insects and small rodents that could get inside. The construction required enormous effort on his part, as he had neither an axe nor a saw. All the logs had to be broken or ground with stones and then tied together with homemade ropes. But the work gave him a purpose and a reason to wake up every morning. He cleared the area around the huts, creating a small observation deck. From here, he could spend hours looking at the horizon, searching for the sails of ships. But now this waiting was not panicky, but calm and methodical. The huts became his fortress, his personal space, where he felt like the master. Here he could take shelter from any storm, both weather and emotional. The smell of smoke and dried grass became the smell of home for him. He constantly improved his buildings, adding new elements and improving their protection. It was a never-ending process of repair and modernization. The house grew and changed along with its inhabitant. It was here, in these simple huts, that he found the peace he could not find in the noisy world of people. He was the king of his little kingdom, even if it consisted of only 2 huts. This construction proved to him that he was capable of creating, not just destroying. Are you ready for the shocking truth about what a civilized European has become? The clothes Selkirk wore when he landed on the island very soon became completely unusable. Salt water, thorny bushes, and constant wear turned his doublet and breeches into rags that barely covered his body. It was impossible to walk around naked because of the cold and the harsh vegetation that scratched his skin. He had to master a craft that was previously considered purely feminine or guild-based, tanning and sewing. He used the skins of wild goats which he hunted for meat as material. But the skin had to be not only removed, but also tanned so that it would not rot and would be soft. Without tanning agents, he used methods inspired by intuition and memory. He cleaned the skins, stretched them in the sun, and rubbed them with fat to make them more elastic. It was dirty and hard work, but the result was durable pieces of leather. He used an old nail as a needle, which he sharpened long and hard on stones. Old stockings or animal sinews served as thread. The stitches were rough and uneven, but they held the structure together, turning the pieces of skin into something resembling clothing. He sewed himself a jacket, pants, and a hat, which looked frightening, but provided excellent protection from the weather. These clothes were like a second skin, saturated with the smell of smoke and wild animals. In such attire, he resembled a yeti more than a subject of the British crown. His shoes wore out quickly, and he soon discovered that it was much more comfortable to walk barefoot. The soles of his feet became so rough that they resembled the soles of boots. He could run over sharp rocks and thorns without feeling pain or injury. His hair and beard, which he had initially tried to trim with a knife, now grew freely, forming a tangled mane. This too was a kind of protection against the cold and insects. Outwardly, he had completely merged with the wild nature of the island. But beneath this animalistic shell, there was still a man who remembered propriety. He tried to keep his clothes as clean as possible. It was a matter of self-respect, not aesthetics. The transformation of his appearance reflected internal changes. He shed the trappings of civilization, leaving only functionality and practicality. He became part of the ecosystem, a predator and a craftsman in one. But even as he became the perfect survivor, he nearly died because of his own carelessness. In the next chapter, you will learn how the pursuit of prey led him to the brink of destruction. One day, Selkirk's confidence in his own abilities played a cruel joke on him, nearly costing him his life. He was chasing a goat in the dense thickets of the highlands, completely focused on the chase. The thrill of the hunt overshadowed his caution, and he did not notice how the bushes hid the edge of the cliff. In an instant, the ground gave way beneath his feet, and he fell down with his prey. The fall was terrible, but by an incredible stroke of luck, the goat ended up beneath him, softening the blow. The animal died instantly, taking the brunt of the impact with the rocks at the bottom of the ravine. Selkirk lost consciousness and lay there, by his estimation, for about a day. When he woke up, pain pierced his entire body, and he could not move. He lay on the animal's carcass, surrounded by sheer walls without water or hope of help. It took him several days just to be able to stand up. Every movement caused excruciating pain, but he knew that staying there meant certain death. With incredible effort, crawling, he got out of the gorge and made his way to his hut. This incident was a harsh reminder of the fragility of human life. He was immobilized in his hut for another 10 days, surviving only thanks to the water and meat supplies he had prudently stockpiled. If it weren't for these supplies, his story would have ended there, in the ravine. After recovering, he became much more cautious, checking every step. He realized that there was no place on the island for risk's sake. Any injury could be fatal in the absence of a doctor. This fall also showed him how important preparation and planning were. He began to create caches of supplies in different parts of the island in case he was unable to return to camp. His survival strategy became more profound and thoughtful. Having miraculously survived, he began to read the Bible with even greater zeal, seeing divine providence in his rescue. He believed that God had spared his life for a reason and that he had a purpose. His back injury continued to bother him for a long time, but it also became his teacher. He learned to respect the island rather than try to conquer it by brute force. But the greatest danger came not from nature, but from the people he had been waiting for so eagerly. The paradox of the situation was that the ship Selkirk so longed to see could bring him death. At that time, the War of the Spanish Succession was raging, and the waters were teeming with enemy Spanish ships. To them, the English privateer was a criminal deserving of hanging or hard labor. One day he saw sails, but as he got closer, he realized they were Spanish. He hid, but a landing party came ashore and noticed his tracks, and then him. A manhunt began, with his life as the prize. Selkirk, who knew the island like the back of his hand, rushed into the forest. The Spaniards fired at him, bullets knocking branches above his head. He ran faster than ever, using his endurance and calloused feet. He climbed a huge, dense tree and hid in its crown, blending in with the foliage. His pursuers came right up to the foot of the tree. They stopped to rest, talk, and even relieve themselves right under the spot where the fugitive was hanging. It was the moment of truth. One careless movement, a drop of sweat, or a crackling branch would give him away. Selkirk held his breath, praying silently and clutching his knife. He was ready to jump on his enemies if they discovered him and sell his life dearly. The Spaniards, having searched around below and found no trace of him, decided to return to the ship. They did not dare to venture deeper into the thicket, fearing ambushes and the unknown. Selkirk heard their voices receding, but did not come down for several more hours. This incident showed him that solitude was better than captivity. He realized that civilization could be more dangerous than the wild. Now he looked at every sail with suspicion, carefully studying the flag. During 4 years of forced asceticism, Alexander Selkirk underwent an incredible physical transformation. From an ordinary sailor prone to obesity and drinking, he became an athlete with perfect reflexes. He could catch up with a wild goat on foot, grab it by the horns and knock it to the ground. His body became sinewy and incredibly strong, adapted to constant movement over rough terrain. His eyesight and hearing were sharpened to the limit, allowing him to notice the slightest changes in his surroundings. He could sense a change in the weather long before the first clouds appeared. But the changes also affected his psyche. He found an inner balance he had never known before. His rage and rebelliousness gave way to calm contemplation and acceptance of his fate. He knew every rock, every plant, and every spring on the island. It was his kingdom, and he ruled it wisely and sparingly. He stopped feeling like a prisoner and began to feel like a master. Selkirk conquered his inner demons. He gave up drinking simply because there was nothing to drink, stopped swearing, there was no one to swear at, and found deep faith The Bible became his main companion, and he knew it almost by heart. The rats that had tormented him at first were now controlled by the semi-wild cats he had tamed. The cats slept with him, keeping him warm at night and chasing away rodents. They were his little army and family. He often sang psalms and talked loudly so as not to forget the language. His voice grew stronger and sounded over the island like the voice of a prophet. He danced with his cats and goats for entertainment. He was no longer the man who had been marooned on the island. He was a natural man in the spirit of Rousseau's philosophy, unspoiled by civilization. He proved that man can live in harmony with nature if he has no choice. But deep down, he still longed for people, for his native Scotland. This longing was quiet but constant. And then, ships flying the English flag appeared on the horizon. On February 1st of 1709, two English privateers, the Duke and the Duchess, commanded by Woodes Rogers, approached the island. Selkirk, seeing the familiar flags, lit a huge signal fire. He was beside himself with joy.
I'm alive!
Running along the shore and waving his arms. When the boat approached the shore, the sailors were shocked by what they saw. Before them stood a wild man in goatskins, covered with hair, who looked at them with mad delight. He tried to speak, but the words stuck in his throat, his tongue unaccustomed to human speech. Selkirk could not immediately explain who he was or how long he had been there. He only moved and gestured, inviting his guests into his hut. Captain Rogers later described him as a man who had forgotten his language. On board the ship, Selkirk could not get used to the usual food for a long time. Ship's biscuits and salted meat seemed tasteless to him, and rum made him sick. He could hardly tolerate shoes, which pressed and rubbed his free feet. The most surprising thing was that William Dampier, the very man who had been on Stradling's expedition and knew Selkirk, served as navigator on Rogers' ship. Dampier confirmed the identity of the savage and gave him the best recommendation, calling him an excellent sailor. Selkirk was immediately appointed assistant captain. His survival skills and knowledge of medicine, he cured many sailors of scurvy with fresh meat and greens, proved invaluable. He became part of the crew again, but now he was held in high esteem. His strength and agility amazed even seasoned pirates. The story of Alexander Selkirk proves that the human spirit is indestructible as long as there is faith and purpose. He went through the hell of loneliness and came out of it not broken, but renewed. He overcame storms, hunger, and despair, but he could not overcome the emptiness of civilized life. Unlike Robinson Crusoe, he did not build a little England on the island, but allowed the island to change him. We admire his physical endurance, but the main lesson of his life is the victory over his own mind. In a world where we are constantly connected, his experience of absolute silence seems frightening and attractive at the same time. Do you think modern people, with our gadgets and habits, could survive in such conditions for even a month? Or have we irretrievably lost the inner strength that people of the past had? Share your opinion in the comments, suggest a topic for the next issue, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories about survival.